Most six-figure earners never cross into real ownership, and it isn't about income. Stanford researchers traced the actual reason, and it comes down to how the brain processes a paycheck. Two people earning the exact same amount can be running two completely different systems in their head. One built for spending well, the other built for owning things. Income keeps one person comfortable forever, while the other quietly crosses into assets, and the split between them happens at a specific identifiable point. That point is what this breaks down, along with the exact test for knowing which side of it you're on. The gap between 100K and 1 nulums looks like a math problem. It is not. It's structurally different, sitting in the brain instead of the bank account, which is exactly why raising income alone rarely closes the gap between the two. Researchers at Stanford's Institute for Economic Policy Research tracked how people move through the major money milestones of their lives, from a first job to a first home to retirement, and looked for what predicts who keeps building and who plateaus. Early asset accumulation was the strongest signal of who stayed resilient. That conclusion lines up with a completely separate line of research on income frequency, often traced to work by Stanford behavioral scientists, looking at the same underlying pattern from a completely different angle entirely. It found something almost counterintuitive. When the exact same total income arrives in smaller, more frequent payments instead of one lump sum, people feel wealthier and spend more freely, even though the total still adds up to the same number on paper. The brain files it as income to enjoy, not as an asset to protect. This is the trap sitting underneath most six-figure careers. A raise gets processed as more spending power, and a bonus gets processed as a reward already earned and now free to use. So a bigger paycheck almost never turns into net worth on its own. It turns into lifestyle instead, unless something interrupts that pattern on purpose. This is why two people can earn identical incomes for a decade and land in totally different categories. One spends more every time. The other leaves the number completely untouched and lets something else absorb the entire increase instead, year after year, without any extra spending to show for it. The real divide was never about how much came in. It's about which of two systems processes that income once it lands, since income thinking treats every dollar as spendable, while asset thinking treats every dollar as raw material for ownership. Most people run the first system for their entire career, and no raise, no promotion, and no new job title has ever flipped that switch on its own. Here's why one system quietly dominates almost everyone's thinking. Income is what economists call a flow. It shows up, gets felt, and gets counted on payday, in a bank alert, in a number moving in real time, impossible to ignore. Assets are what's called a stock, and they sit untouched in an account or a piece of property, where unless someone goes looking, they barely register at all. Stanford's Graduate School of Business has published research on financial resources and personal meaning. One finding stands out. As people accumulate more financial resources, meaning becomes a weaker predictor of their happiness, and the resources themselves start carrying more and more of that psychological weight instead. In a system built on income thinking, money is a side character. Once financial resources compound, the brain starts treating money as the main character in the story instead. And that reorientation is the actual split between the two groups on the thumbnail. That reorientation isn't automatic, and it never happens by accident, no matter how much someone earns or how many raises show up along the way, year after year. It has to be built, deliberately, the same way any other skill gets built. Separately, psychologists studying perceived wealth found something backwards. In one widely cited study, when a person's net worth was negative, about 6 in 10 people focused their attention on their assets, but when net worth was positive, only about 1 in 4 did the same. The brain isn't running one consistent formula for feeling wealthy. It grabs whichever number is more visible in the moment and lets that number define reality. And the choice of what to measure is rarely made on purpose. The measurement chooses itself. This same pattern sits behind mental accounting, something behavioral economists have documented for decades. The theory holds that people mentally split their money into separate categories: current income, current assets, and future income, and treat those categories as though they can't be moved between. A raise drops straight into the income bucket, and it never automatically crosses into the asset bucket because the brain was never built to move it there on its own. Somebody has to force that transfer, deliberately, every single time money comes in. That's the exact mechanism sitting underneath the 100K plateau. And there's one specific moment in every financial life where a person either builds a system to force that transfer on purpose, or spends the next decade running the same default without ever noticing it. Here's the protocol that actually forces the switch, and it runs in 3 steps. Step 1. Tag every dollar that comes in the moment it lands, either asset or lifestyle, before it touches a single expense, and that single habit directly interrupts mental accounting at the exact point where it usually wins. Instead of letting the brain automatically file a raise as extra spending money, this manually overrides that default and forces a decision at the single moment that matters most. The moment the money first arrives, before it has a chance to blend into the checking account and disappear into general spending. Step 2. Pay the asset tag first and automate the transfer so the decision never depends on your willpower on a random Tuesday. Behavioral researchers have documented for years that default settings decide most financial behavior, far more than intentions ever do, even on the days motivation runs out completely. Automatic retirement enrollment and automatic contribution increases consistently outperform manual saving, for one simple reason: the transfer happens before the brain gets a chance to reclassify that money as spendable. Set it for payday. The income thinking system never gets a vote in the decision. Step 3. Track your net worth as the primary number, not your income. Research on cognitive ability and financial outcomes found that people with higher asset-to-income ratios weren't simply earning more, even after accounting for income directly, which points to something in how they tracked and allocated money, not just how much of it came in. Checking a paycheck only answers how much came in this month. Checking net worth answers the only question that actually matters, which is how much a person owns right now, regardless of what happened to income this particular month. There's a related idea in economics called the buffer stock model of saving, developed at Stanford, which found that households aim for a stable ratio between savings and income. Fall below that target, and saving takes over. Rise above it, and spending takes over instead, automatically. Tracking net worth on purpose is how a person sets that target deliberately, instead of drifting into whatever ratio habit and default settings happen to produce by accident. There's a place where this breaks down for almost everyone. The most common mistake at this stage is simple. Raising income while keeping the same tracking habits just runs a bigger paycheck through the same old system, and it produces more expensive spending at a slightly higher level of comfort. Without changing which number gets checked and which account gets paid first, a raise changes nothing about which category, income, or asset a person is building. Run this forward 5 years, and the two paths look completely different. The person still running income thinking keeps getting raises, keeps feeling more successful at every step, and still owns almost nothing that generates a single dollar on its own. One bad year, one layoff, one health scare, and the entire structure is gone, because nothing was ever converted into something that outlives a paycheck. The income was real. It just never became anything. Nothing about that outcome required bad luck or a single bad decision made at the wrong moment. It just required never building the one mechanism that turns income into ownership. That's the quiet, unglamorous difference between staying at 100K forever and eventually crossing into 1 million. And it has nothing to do with which person worked harder or wanted it more. The person running asset thinking looks almost boring by comparison. Income becomes less important over time because the assets are doing quiet work in the background, compounding without needing daily attention or a single heroic effort. That difference shows up beyond a bank statement too. One nationally tracked study followed adults over several years and found that those holding less than $5,000 in financial assets were more than twice as likely to screen positive for depression or anxiety compared to adults holding $100,000 or more, even when income itself was held constant. Assets, independent of income, changed the odds. None of this means money should become the center of anyone's identity. Research on valuing money versus having it found that people who treat money as the core of a good life report lower well-being overall, regardless of how much they have. The goal was never to worship the asset column. It was to build enough of a buffer that the rest of life stops depending on the next paycheck landing on time, whatever else happens that particular month. This was never about willpower. It's a repeatable protocol, and it starts with one number, check today, before anything else happens with the rest of this week or the rest of this month. Pull up last month's transactions and tag every dollar as asset or lifestyle. That single exercise shows exactly which system you've been running. If this changes how you look at your own number, subscribe, because this channel breaks down the mental models behind the people who actually cross into ownership every week.